Hello, welcome back to Heart Heart. My new story is ready. Enjoy watching.
My stepfather looked at my 8-year-old son on Thanksgiving and told him he couldn't sit at the family table, said it was for family. My boy, my Levi, picked up his plate without a word and walked to a folding card table in the corner of the dining room, and I sat there, a major in the United States Army, a woman who had led soldiers through combat zones, and I didn't say a single word. Not that night. But less than a month later, I stood in my mother's kitchen, looked her straight in the eye, and told her, "One more word from your husband about my son, and there would be no more nice civil talks. I would handle him myself, clearly explaining where he stands and why my son is not his. Do you understand?" My mother just stared at me with her mouth open. So let me tell you how a decorated Army officer ended up ready to take apart her own stepfather piece by piece. It started on that Thanksgiving. My name is Roxana Bush. I'm 34 years old and I'm a major in the United States Army. I serve as the executive officer of a forward support battalion at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, which means I'm the second in command of about 550 soldiers. I've been in for 12 years, commissioned through ROTC right out of college at 22, 2 combat deployments, a Bronze Star. I've briefed generals, managed multi-million-dollar logistics operations, and once kept a supply convoy moving through a sandstorm that turned the sky the color of burnt copper. I say this not to brag. I say it so you understand that I am not a woman who panics easily. I'm not a woman who acts without a plan, and I am absolutely not a woman you want to cross when it comes to my child. Levi is 8. He's the kind of kid who sits at the kitchen table for 2 hours, gluing tiny pieces of a model airplane together and doesn't make a sound. He reads books 2 grade levels ahead. He says yes, ma'am, and no, sir, without being reminded. His father, a civilian named Toby I dated when I was 24, and a young captain stationed at Fort Campbell, found out I was pregnant and vanished like smoke. Sent me one postcard from Reno, Nevada, about 3 months later. It had a picture of a slot machine on the front. No return address, no explanation. That's the kind of man Toby was, always gambling, never winning. I raised Levi on my own, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. That boy is the best decision I've ever made, and I've made some pretty solid decisions under mortar fire. Now my mother, Nadine Tipton, 66 years old, lives in Fuquay Varina, North Carolina, about 30 minutes from Fort Liberty. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office for 30 years, from 28 to 58, and then retired. She owns her house free and clear, paid it off over 25 years on a receptionist's salary, which tells you everything about the kind of woman she is. She lived on her savings and Social Security, kept her yard immaculate, went to church on Sundays, and was quietly, stubbornly independent. But she was also lonely. 8 years of living alone after retirement will do that. And 3 years ago, she met a man named Vernon Tipton at a church picnic. He brought her flowers. He fixed her porch railing that same weekend. He called her darling and told her she was the most beautiful woman at the potluck, which, no disrespect to my mother, was a crowd of about 40 people, and most of them were over 70. So the competition wasn't exactly the Miss America pageant, but it worked. She fell for him, hard. They got married after 7 months of dating. I had reservations. I always do. It's the officer in me. But I wanted my mother to be happy. She'd spent so many years alone. Who was I to stand in the way of that? So Vernon moved into her house, and he brought 2 things with him: a lazy boy recliner, the size of a small aircraft carrier, and opinions about absolutely everything. Both were oversized. I swear that recliner had its own gravitational field. Once Vernon sank into it, nothing on earth could move him. Not a tornado, not a commercial break, not even the fire department. For the first several months, things seemed okay. Vernon was polite to me, if a little stiff. He shook Levi's hand once like Levi was a 40-year-old accountant rather than a 7-year-old child, but around 6 months into the marriage, the comments started. Small at first, like termites. You don't hear them until the damage is done. Vernon would say things about Levi when we visited. That boy needs more structure. He's too soft for his age. If he were my kid, he'd know how to shake a man's hand properly. Vernon had never raised a son. He had one daughter, Courtney Hale, from his first marriage, and Courtney had turned out exactly the way you'd expect the daughter of a man like Vernon to turn out, confident in all the wrong places and generous with opinions nobody asked for. Vernon also had a 6-year-old granddaughter, Kinley, Courtney's daughter. And let me tell you, that child could do no wrong in Vernon's eyes. At every family gathering, Kinley got new toys, compliments, and first pick of everything. Levi got critiqued. At a summer cookout, Vernon gave Kinley a brand new bicycle with pink streamers on the handles. He gave Levi a used coloring book with half the pages already scribbled in. My son was 8. He was building scale models of World War II fighter planes, but Vernon either didn't notice or didn't care. I'm still not sure which one is worse. Here's something I need you to understand, because it matters later. As a single parent in the Army, I'm required to maintain what's called a family care plan under Army Regulation 600-20. It's a legal document that designates a caregiver for my child whenever I'm called away. Deployments, field exercises, emergency operations. My designated caregiver had been my mother for years. She lived 30 minutes away. She adored Levi, and the arrangement worked like clockwork. If that plan fell apart, if I couldn't guarantee that Levi had a safe, stable place to go, I'd face administrative action. That's not a slap on the wrist. That can end a career. So when Thanksgiving came around and we all gathered at my mother's house, Vernon, Nadine, me, Levi, Courtney, her husband Travis, and little Kinley, I thought it would be like every other family dinner. A little tense, a little awkward, but survivable. The turkey was carved. Everyone was finding their seats. And then Vernon looked at my son and said it. The main table is for family. He can sit over there. He pointed at a folding card table shoved into the corner of the dining room, the kind of table you set drinks on at a party. Not a person, not a child. Levi looked at me. His eyes were filling up, but he didn't cry. He didn't argue. He just picked up his plate, quietly, with more dignity than any 8-year-old should ever have to show, and walked to the corner. And nobody at that main table said a word. Not Courtney, not Travis, not my own mother. And I sat there and let it happen because I was trying to keep the peace, because I didn't want to cause a scene, because I told myself I'd handle it later, like a rational adult. I was wrong. That night, driving back to my apartment near base, Levi fell asleep in the back seat of my truck with his cheek pressed against the window. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and I made a promise, not out loud, just to myself, in the silence of that dark highway between Fuquay-Varina and Fort Liberty. This would not continue. I didn't know yet how much worse things were about to get, but I knew something had shifted inside me that night, and it was not shifting back. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop me a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one, and your support means the world to me. December hit, and with it came a week-long battalion field training exercise at Fort Liberty. As the executive officer, I was responsible for the entire logistical backbone of that operation. 550 soldiers, vehicles, communications, supply chains. I couldn't skip it. I couldn't phone it in. Levi went to stay with my mother, just like always, just like the family care plan required. I didn't love the idea of him being under the same roof as Vernon for 7 straight days, but Nadine promised me she'd keep things under control, and I trusted her. That was my mistake, not because my mother is a bad person, she's not, but because I underestimated how far Vernon was willing to go when I wasn't around to watch. When I picked Levi up the following Sunday, something was off. He was quiet, quieter than his usual quiet, which for Levi was practically non-existent. I asked him how the week went. Fine, he said. I asked if he'd worked on his models. He shook his head. I asked where his P-38 Lightning kit was, the one I'd bought him 2 weeks earlier at the hobby shop on Bragg Boulevard in Fayetteville, $19.95 plus tax. He told me Vernon threw it away, because Levi had left a mess on the kitchen table, 3 small plastic parts and an instruction sheet. That was the mess. Vernon Tipton, a 61-year-old man who hadn't washed a single dish since the Clinton administration, had decided that 3 model airplane pieces on a table were a crisis of household discipline that required immediate intervention. I called my mother that evening. She told me Vernon was just trying to teach Levi responsibility. I asked her, since when does a man who leaves his reading glasses, his TV remote, and his half-empty soda cans on every flat surface in the house get to lecture an 8-year-old about tidiness? She went quiet. She always went quiet when I had a point she didn't want to admit to. Around the same time, Vernon's daughter Courtney started showing up more often. She began dropping off Kinley at my mother's house 3, sometimes 4 days a week. Free daycare. Nadine never said no. It's not in her nature. But while Courtney was getting her childcare subsidized by my mother's good heart, she was also planting seeds. She told Nadine that maybe Levi should be evaluated by someone, that he seemed a little withdrawn, that he wasn't like other boys his age. This coming from a woman whose own daughter once threw a full-body tantrum in a Target because the shopping cart wasn't pink enough. That tantrum lasted 11 minutes. I know because Courtney told the story at Easter like it was charming. But sure, Levi, the kid who reads chapter books and builds scale model aircraft and says please and thank you to strangers, he's the one who needs professional evaluation. Meanwhile, Vernon was tightening the noose from another angle. He started suggesting to Nadine that Levi shouldn't come over as much, that the boy overwhelmed her. Overwhelmed. My polite, quiet, self-contained son who could occupy himself in a room for 3 hours without making a sound. Apparently that child was too much for a grown man who spent his days in a recliner, watching fishing shows to handle. And then I found out what Vernon was doing outside the house. A neighbor of my mother's, a woman named Barbara Pennick, who I'd known since elementary school, called me one evening and said she thought I should know something. Vernon had been telling people at Ridgecrest Baptist Church that Levi was a troubled boy from a broken home, and that Vernon was doing his best to straighten him out. He was performing fatherhood for the whole congregation, playing the devoted grandfather figure for a child who wasn't his, while the child's actual mother, a Bronze Star recipient who had led soldiers in 2 combat deployments, was being framed as some woman who couldn't raise her own kid. I don't think my blood pressure had ever reached those numbers outside of a firefight. I drove to Fouquet Varina the next day, walked into my mother's house without calling first. Vernon was in his lazy boy. Of course he was. That's where Vernon existed, planted like some kind of sedentary king on a microfiber throne, remote in one hand, opinion in the other. I asked my mother to step into the kitchen with me. She followed. I closed the door, and I looked her straight in the eye, standing in the same kitchen where she taught me to make cornbread when I was 9, and I said what I'd come to say, not shouting, not shaking, calm and measured, the way I deliver a mission brief to a room full of officers who outrank me. One more word from your husband about my son, and there will be no more nice, civil talks. I will handle him myself, clearly explaining where he stands and why my son is not his business. Do you understand? My mother cried. She told me Vernon meant well. She said I was being too aggressive, which was honestly something because I'd just spoken more calmly than I had all week. And that week included a conversation with a supply sergeant who'd misplaced $14,000 worth of night vision equipment. But apparently standing up for my child made me the aggressive one in this house. Then she said the words that landed hardest. He's my husband, Roxana. Not forever, not with cruelty, but in that moment, she chose him. The man she'd known for 3 years over the daughter she'd raised for 34. I drove back to base. And that same week, Levi said something to me that came close to cracking the wall I'd spent 12 years in the Army building. He was sitting on the edge of his bed in his pajamas, legs dangling, not looking at me. And he told me very quietly that he didn't want to go to Grandma's house anymore. Vernon had told him that real boys don't play with toy planes, and that he needed to grow up and stop acting like a baby. My son is 8 years old. He's supposed to play with toy planes. That is literally what childhood is for. I sat down next to him on that bed and put my arm around him, and told him there's nothing wrong with building things, that creating something with your hands and your brain is one of the smartest things a person can do at any age. He leaned into me. I don't think he fully believed me yet. That night, after Levi fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall. If my son wouldn't go to Nadine's house, or if it wasn't safe for him there with Vernon around, my family care plan was finished. I'd need to find a new designated caregiver near Fort Liberty within weeks, someone the Army would approve, or I'd face administrative action. My next field exercise was 6 weeks out, and here was the timing that made everything worse. My brigade commander had just told me that I was being considered for resident selection to the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. That's the competitive course the Army sends its top-performing majors to, the ones they're grooming for higher command. He told me I was tracking for a top block officer evaluation report, a most qualified rating, the highest you can get. But he also told me to stay focused and stable. The Army sees everything, and I was sitting there with a crumbling family care plan, a stepfather who was systematically destroying my family, and a son who didn't want to visit his own grandmother. That's the thing about being a single mom in the military. You carry 2 rucksacks at all times, one on each shoulder, and you never, ever get to put either one down. January came in cold and gray, which felt about right for the mood I was in. My mother asked me to come over and help her with tax paperwork. She'd always been sharp with money, but nervous with government forms, and every year I'd sit with her at the kitchen table and walk through everything. I drove to Fuquay-Varina on a Saturday morning with my laptop and a folder of blank forms. Vernon was out, gone to look at something at a Tractor Supply in Holly Springs, which probably meant he was about to buy another thing nobody needed with money that wasn't his. But I didn't fully understand that yet. We sat at the kitchen table and I pulled up Nadine's bank accounts online. That's when I saw it. Her savings account balance, $11,214. I blinked, then I blinked again. The last time I'd helped her with taxes, just 12 months earlier, that account had held over $60,000. My mother had been careful with money her entire life. She packed her own lunches for 30 years at that dental office. She drove the same Buick LeSabre for 11 years before trading it in. She built that savings balance one careful dollar at a time, and it was supposed to carry her through the rest of her life. I asked her where the money went. She got flustered, fidgeted with her reading glasses, said they'd had some expenses. What expenses, Mom? Well, Vernon bought a base fishing boat back in October, $6,800 currently sitting in the driveway under a blue tarp, unused. He bought a zero-turn riding mower, $4,200, for a lot that's barely a quarter acre. You could mow that yard with a push mower and a podcast. There was a $189 Yeti cooler, a set of Callaway golf clubs, $1,400, new boots, new clothes, a subscription to some streaming fishing channel I didn't even know existed, and my mother couldn't remember the rest. Just other things. The man owned a $189 Yeti cooler and had nothing to put in it except 3 Budweisers and a leftover ham sandwich. That cooler cost more per beer than a night at the Ritz-Carlton. Nobody was laughing. I drove home that afternoon and something in my brain shifted. Not just anger. I'd been angry for weeks. This was something colder, something more focused. The same feeling I get when a logistics problem hits my desk and the numbers don't line up. When something's wrong in a supply chain, you don't guess, you trace the data. So that's what I did. I started with public records. Vernon always told people, my mother, the church, anyone who'd stand still long enough, that he was a retired regional manager from Pep Boys, the auto parts chain, like he'd overseen an entire territory. Important, successful. I made one phone call to Pep Boys Corporate Human Resources and asked for employment verification on Vernon Tipton. What I learned, Vernon had been an assistant store manager, one location, Wilmington, North Carolina. Not regional anything, not a manager of managers, just an assistant at one store. And he didn't retire. He was terminated 4 years ago. The HR representative couldn't give me the official reason, but the 3-second pause before she said, "I'm not able to discuss the circumstances of separation," told me everything I needed to hear. One phone call. That's all it took to collapse the first lie. And in my experience, both military and personal, when one lie collapses, there's always another one right behind it. So I dug further. Court records found Vernon's divorce filing in Lee County, Florida. First wife, Donna Jessup, Fort Myers. Marriage lasted 4 years. Ended 6 years ago. I found a working phone number through a public records search and called her on a Tuesday evening. What Donna told me made my stomach physically drop. Same story, the same exact story. Vernon met Donna at a community cookout. Charming, helpful, fixed things around her house. Called her sweetheart. They got married. He moved into her home, a home Donna owned outright. Within a few months, the spending started. Over 4 years, Vernon drained nearly $40,000 from Donna's accounts. He was controlling with her teenage son, Tyler. Told the boy he was useless. Overruled Donna's parenting decisions. Tried to impose his own rules in a house that wasn't his. And then, just like with my mother, Vernon had himself added to Donna's bank accounts. And then her deed. By the time Donna finally gathered the courage to throw him out, she had to hire an attorney just to reclaim her own house. Donna said one thing that I will never forget. He doesn't stop. He keeps going until there's nothing left to take. The house, the savings, the dignity, all of it. And then she said, "Quieter, I wish someone had done this for me when it was happening." Donna agreed immediately to provide a written statement and make herself available by phone. She didn't hesitate for even a second. That night, I checked the property records for my mother's house in Wake County, and my heart stopped. 6 months earlier, right around the time I first noticed Vernon getting bolder, more confident, more openly controlling, he had convinced Nadine to add his name to the house deed, the house she paid off over 25 years on a dental receptionist's salary, the house she scraped and saved and sacrificed for, one careful paycheck at a time. Vernon Tipton's name was now on that deed. He told her it was just for protection, in case something happened to her. Protection. That word tasted like poison. I sat at my kitchen table that night, Levi asleep down the hall, a folder of printed documents in front of me. Bank records, property filings, employment verification, Donna's phone number on a yellow sticky note, and I finally saw Vernon Tipton for exactly what he was. Not a grumpy old man, not a difficult stepfather with old-fashioned ideas. A system, a pattern with legs. He finds women who are alone, women with homes and savings and good hearts and no one standing guard. He moves in. He charms them. He isolates them from anyone who might ask questions. He drains the money. He takes the house. And the cruelty toward Levi, the comments, the exclusion, the deliberate humiliation, that wasn't personal. It was tactical. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every thrown-away model airplane was designed to push me away. If I stopped visiting, if Levi refused to come, then nobody was watching Nadine. Nobody was checking the accounts. Nobody was looking at the deed. Vernon Tipton thought he was running a masterclass in quiet manipulation. What he didn't realize is that his stepdaughter had been literally trained by the United States Army to identify hostile strategies, build an intelligence picture, and dismantle the threat, piece by piece, methodically, without making a sound. I pulled a legal pad from my desk drawer. In the Army, when you plan a mission, you write what's called an OPORD, an operations order, 5 paragraphs. Situation, mission, execution, sustainment, command, and signal. I'd written hundreds of them over 12 years, led briefings on them at 3 in the morning in rooms where everyone smelled like diesel and coffee. This one would be different. This one was personal. At the top of the page, I wrote Vernon's full name and drew a clean circle around it. Vernon Tipton was about to become the target of an operations order he never saw coming. Over the next 3 weeks, I built a case the way I build an operations plan. One verified fact at a time. No assumptions, no gaps. Every evening after Levi went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, my legal pad, and a growing folder of printed documents. I created a timeline of Vernon's financial moves going back 2.5 years. Every purchase, every withdrawal, every charge on my mother's credit card. I cross-referenced bank statements with Vernon's social media posts. The man actually posted photos of his base boat the day he bought it, captioned retirement perks, with a sunglasses emoji, posted his Callaway golf clubs a week later. Each post had a date. Each date matched a withdrawal from Nadine's accounts. The total, when I added every documented transaction, came to $48,700. That number sat on my legal pad circled 3 times because I kept checking the math and hoping I was wrong. I was not wrong. I called Donna Jessup again. She had her written statement ready. 2 pages, typed, detailed, signed, dates, amounts, descriptions of Vernon's behavior toward her son Tyler, the process of getting Vernon off her deed after the divorce. She scanned it and emailed it to me. She also gave me a name I'd already found on my own, Jerry Girardi. Jerry was the actual store manager at the Pep Boys location in Wilmington where Vernon had worked. Donna remembered the name because Vernon used to complain about Jerry constantly, called him incompetent, said he should have had Jerry's job. The truth, as it turned out, was the other way around. I called Jerry on a Thursday evening. He picked up on the second ring, and the moment I said Vernon Tipton's name, Jerry let out a sigh so long it could have deflated a parade float. He confirmed everything. Vernon was an assistant store manager. Not regional, not senior, not anything close to what he'd been claiming, and he was terminated. Not retired, after a $9,300 inventory discrepancy was traced back to his department. The company decided not to press charges, just let him go quietly. Vernon told everyone at the store he was taking early retirement to enjoy life. Jerry said he nearly choked on his coffee when he heard that. He agreed to be available by phone if I ever needed someone to confirm the employment history on record. I thanked him and hung up. Another piece locked into place. The legal picture came next. I reached out to Terry Ahrens, a real estate attorney in Fayetteville, who'd been recommended by a fellow officer's wife. I kept things straightforward. I wasn't looking for full representation yet, just clarity on what we were dealing with. Terry explained that if Vernon was added to the deed under false pretenses or undue influence, it could be challenged through civil court. She also told me something that changed the entire shape of my thinking. What Vernon had done, systematically depleting the finances of a person over 65, could constitute elder financial exploitation under North Carolina General Statute 14112.2. For amounts exceeding $20,000, that's a Class G felony. And the deed situation, obtaining real property through deception, could fall under NC General Statute 14-100, obtaining property by false pretenses. Depending on the value of the home, that could be a Class C felony. Class C, that carries up to 15 years. This wasn't leverage anymore. This was criminal. And then Vernon made a move that told me he could feel the ground shifting under his feet. Toward the end of January, Nadine called me one evening sounding confused and a little flustered. Vernon had come home with paperwork from a financial services company, some outfit I'd never heard of, and told her they needed to open a joint investment account. He wanted her to transfer the remaining balance from her savings, $11,214. Plus redirect her Social Security direct deposits into this new joint account. He said it was better interest rates and smart estate planning. My mother isn't a fool. She worked with numbers every day for 30 years at that dental office, scheduling patients and managing billing. Something about the paperwork didn't sit right with her. She called me and said, "I don't know, Roxana. Something about this doesn't feel right." That sentence hit me 2 ways at once. First, relief because my mother's instincts were still working, still sharp under all that fear and denial. And second, urgency because Vernon was accelerating. He could feel something was off, and he was trying to lock down the remaining money before anyone could stop him. The man was panicking and disguising it as financial planning. I told her, "Do not sign anything. Not yet. Just wait. Trust me." She said, "Okay." And for the first time in months, I felt like she actually meant it. 2 days later, Courtney Hale called me, bright and pleasant the way a person sounds when they're delivering bad news and enjoying it. She told me that Daddy and Mama Nadine, she actually called my mother Mama Nadine, like she'd earned that, were planning a small birthday dinner for Nadine in late February. Just intimate, just family. And by family, she meant Vernon, Nadine, Courtney, Travis, and Kinley. She didn't mention me. She didn't mention Levi. We were not on the list. Not invited to my own mother's birthday, the woman who pushed me into this world after 14 hours of labor and her husband of 2.5 years had decided I didn't make the guest list. Vernon Tipton had the audacity of a man who brings a folding chair to a concert and sits himself down in the front row. I thanked Courtney for letting me know, hung up and sat in my truck in the Fort Liberty parking lot for a full 5 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing. Here's where a different person might have done something dramatic. Shown up at that birthday dinner, slammed a folder on the table, confronted Vernon in front of everyone. I've seen people do that in movies, and it always looks satisfying. But I'm not in the movies. I'm in the Army. And in the Army, the best operations are the ones the enemy never sees coming. The ones where the target wakes up one morning and realizes the walls have already closed in around him. My plan had 2 steps. Step 1, meet with Nadine alone without Vernon. Show her everything, not as an ambush, as an offering. Give her the information she deserved and let her make her own decision. Because without my mother's cooperation, without her filing a report, the criminal case would be weaker. She had to choose this. Step 2. If Nadine agreed, we'd go together to the Fouquet-Varina Police Department and file a formal report. Then we'd step back and let the law do what it was designed to do. No theater, no screaming matches, just evidence and the system. The night before I planned to go see Nadine, I was at the kitchen table organizing the folder for the last time. Employment verification, financial timeline, Donna Jessup's signed statement, deed records, screenshots from Vernon's social media, the joint investment account paperwork he'd brought home, proof that he was still actively trying to exploit my mother even now. Levi patted down the hallway in his socks and stood in the doorway. He asked me why I was working so late. I told him that sometimes grown-ups have to fix things that aren't fair, and that fixing them right takes preparation. He looked at the folder, then back at me. Is it about Grandpa Vernon? I didn't flinch. I said, it's about making sure nobody treats you like you don't matter. Because you do, more than anything in this world. He walked over and hugged me. Then he went back to bed without another word. I set my alarm for 0500, like always. 12 years in the Army and I still can't sleep past 5. That morning, though, I was up at 4. Some missions you just don't want to be late for. Vernon Tipton went to the VFW hall in Fouquet-Varina every Tuesday for their lunch crowd, sat at the bar, ate the meatloaf special, and held court with actual veterans about topics he had no business discussing. The man had never worn a military uniform in his life, unless you count the Pep Boys polo shirt, which I assure you the Department of Defense does not. But there he was every Tuesday, nodding along with men who'd served in Vietnam and Desert Storm like he was one of them. I picked a Tuesday. I arrived at my mother's house at 11:15 in the morning, mid-February, the sky flat and overcast like a wool blanket stretched across North Carolina. Vernon's truck was gone. Good. I parked in the driveway next to the tarp-covered fishing boat and walked to the front door with my folder under my arm. Nadine opened the door and looked surprised, then immediately worried. She could tell from my face that this wasn't a casual visit. Mothers always can. I asked if we could sit at the kitchen table. She put on a pot of coffee. Because my mother's response to everything from a rainy afternoon to the collapse of civilization is to put on a pot of coffee. And we sat down across from each other. I started gently. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I said, Mom, I need to show you some things, and I need you to look at all of it before you say anything. Can you do that for me? She nodded. Her hands were wrapped around her coffee mug like she was bracing for something. I opened the folder. First, the employment lie. I told her that Vernon was not a retired regional manager from Pep Boys. He was an assistant store manager at one location in Wilmington. He didn't retire. He was fired. A $9,300 inventory shortage was traced to his department. I had the employment verification. I had Jerry Girardi's contact information if she wanted to hear it firsthand. Nadine didn't speak. Her jaw tightened. This was the story Vernon had told her when they were dating. The successful, responsible man who'd managed an entire region and retired comfortably. It was the foundation she'd built her trust on, and I'd just pulled it out from under her. Second, the money. I laid the timeline on the table. Every purchase, every withdrawal, every credit card charge matched to dates and amounts. The fishing boat, $6,800. The riding mower, $4,200. The golf clubs, $1,400. The Yeti cooler. The boots. The streaming subscriptions. All of it drawn from her accounts, totaling $48,700 in 2.5 years. Her savings, the money she'd built over 3 decades of packed lunches and an 11-year-old Buick, reduced to just over $11,000. My mother's hand went to her mouth. She stared at the numbers, and I could see her doing the math in her head, the same way she used to reconcile the dental office accounts at the end of every month. The numbers didn't lie. They never do. Third, the deed. I showed her the property record. Vernon had gotten his name added to her house 6 months ago. I told her what Terry Aarons, the real estate attorney, had explained, that this could be challenged as fraud if it was obtained through deception or undue influence. That house, 25 years of payments on a receptionist's salary, was now legally half Vernon's on paper. Fourth, Donna Jessup. I told my mother about Vernon's first wife. I laid it out slowly because I knew this was the one that would hurt the most. Same pattern. Identical. Vernon married Donna, moved into her home, drained $40,000, was cruel to her teenage son, got himself on the deed. When Donna finally pushed him out, she had to fight in court just to reclaim her own property. I put Donna's signed written statement on the table and told Nadine I could call Donna right now if she wanted to hear it herself. The phone was in my hand. My mother was crying. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind where tears just slide down and the person doesn't even bother wiping them. I waited. I didn't push. This was her moment, not mine. And then Nadine did something I did not expect. She stood up, walked down the hallway to her bedroom, and came back carrying a shoebox, a plain brown shoebox with a rubber band around it. She set it on the table and opened it. Inside were receipts, bank printouts she'd circled with a ballpoint pen, a handwritten list on the back of a church bulletin, amounts she couldn't account for, dates that didn't match anything Vernon had told her. She had been tracking discrepancies for over a year. My mother knew. Not everything. She didn't know about Donna Jessup. She didn't know about the firing, but she knew the money didn't add up. She'd known for months. She was scared to confront it, because admitting it was true meant admitting she'd been fooled. And admitting you've been fooled at 66 by a man you let into your home, your bed, your bank account felt unbearable to her. She looked at me through wet eyes and said, I didn't want to be the old woman who got tricked. And I said, you're not. You're the woman who kept the receipts. We held each other in that kitchen for a long time. No, I told you so. I swore to myself I would never say those words. She was my mother. She was brave enough to keep that shoebox even when she was terrified of what it meant. That's not weakness. That's a woman gathering evidence when she doesn't even know she's gathering evidence. When we sat back down, I explained the legal reality. What Vernon had done almost certainly qualified as elder financial exploitation under North Carolina law, a felony. The deed situation could be a separate felony charge, but for law enforcement to act effectively, they needed the victim to file a report. Without Nadine's statement, prosecution would be significantly harder. I wasn't going to force her. This had to be her choice. I told her that Donna Jessup wished every single day that someone had been there to help her when it was happening, that Donna spent years recovering, financially, emotionally, that Vernon had done this before, and he would keep doing it until someone stopped him. Nadine looked at the folder, looked at her shoebox, looked at me. When do we go? The last week of February, my mother and I walked into the Fuquay-Varina Police Department together. Nadine filed a formal report. I handed the detective, a calm, thorough man who took careful notes, the entire evidence package. Bank records, property filings, employment verification, Donna Jessup's signed statement with her contact information, Vernon's social media screenshots matched to withdrawal dates, and the joint investment account paperwork Vernon had tried to get Nadine to sign. The detective reviewed the package slowly. Then he looked up and said, in a tone that was clearly off the record, that this was one of the most organized evidence presentations he'd ever received from a victim's family. I told him 12 years of Army staff work had to pay off somewhere. He almost smiled. The case was referred to the Wake County District Attorney's Office, and then began the hardest part, waiting. The DA needed time to review. A warrant had to be prepared. Nadine had to go home and act normal, sleep in the same house as Vernon, cook dinner, watch him sink into that lazy boy every evening and talk about taking the boat out in the spring. 3 weeks of pretending everything was fine while the walls closed in around a man who had no idea they were moving. I coached my mother, don't change your routine. Don't confront him. Don't give him any reason to suspect. She nodded. She was tougher than Vernon Tipton had ever given her credit for, tougher than he could have possibly imagined. If this story hit close to home, I'd love for you to subscribe and share it. And if you have your own story about standing your ground for family, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. The arrest happened on a Tuesday in mid-March. I remember because it was Vernon's VFW day, but he didn't make it to the meatloaf special that afternoon. Nadine was at my apartment near Fort Liberty. I'd arranged for her to spend the day with Levi. Took her there myself that morning early, before Vernon woke up. She sat on my couch and drank coffee and watched Levi work on a new model at the kitchen table, a B-17 Flying Fortress, and for the first time in months she looked like the woman I remembered from my childhood, calm, present, not flinching every time a door opened. 2 Wake County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the house on Sycamore Lane in Fuquay-Varina at approximately 11:40 in the morning. Vernon answered the front door in his house slippers and a flannel shirt. They served the arrest warrant, 2 counts. Count 1, exploitation of an older adult. North Carolina General Statute 14-112.2, Class G felony. Count 2, obtaining real property by false pretenses. North Carolina General Statute 14-100, Class C felony. Vernon Tipton walked out of my mother's house in handcuffs, past his lazy boy, past the unused Callaway golf clubs leaning against the hall closet, past the fishing boat sitting under its blue tarp in the driveway, the $6,800 boat that had never once touched water, past the $4,200 riding mower parked next to it on a quarter-acre lot. He walked past every single thing he'd purchased with my mother's money, and he couldn't take any of it with him. Bail was set at $75,000. Vernon didn't have it. Of course he didn't. The man hadn't had his own money in years. He called Courtney from the Wake County Detention Center. Now here's the part I didn't plan. While the arrest was happening, I had already sent Courtney a package. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I sent her Donna Jessup's signed statement and Donna's phone number. No message from me, just the documents. Let them speak. Courtney read the statement. Then she called Donna herself, and Donna told Courtney everything. The same pattern, the same manipulation, the same cruelty to her son Tyler, the same man, Courtney's own father, the man Courtney had defended, enabled, and helped exclude me and Levi from family dinners. When Vernon called Courtney from detention asking her to post his bail, Courtney said no. She didn't yell. She didn't lecture. She just said she couldn't do it, and she hung up. Vernon sat in the Wake County Detention Center with no money, no one to call, and nothing but a pair of house slippers. The legal process moved forward with the kind of efficiency you get when the evidence is overwhelming and the defendant has no resources to fight it. Vernon's public defender reviewed the case and advised him to take a deal. Facing a Class C felony on Count 2, which carries 44 to 182 months in North Carolina, Vernon agreed to plead guilty to Count 1, the Class G felony. The plea deal, 18 months in a North Carolina state prison, full restitution of $48,700, and a permanent restraining order. No contact with Nadine Tipton, Roxana Bush, or Levi Bush, ever. The deed was handled through civil proceedings. Terry Ahrens filed on Nadine's behalf, and because the criminal case had already established fraud, the quitclaim was voided. The house, every square foot of it, went back to Nadine's name alone, where it belonged, where it had always belonged. As part of the restitution order, Vernon's assets purchased with Nadine's funds were seized. The base boat, the golf clubs, the riding mower. That boat sat in the driveway for 8 months and never once touched water. Kind of poetic, honestly. Just like Vernon. All show, no depth. Nadine filed for divorce the same week as the sentencing. Val Whelan, a sharp family attorney in Fayetteville, handled it clean and fast, uncontested. Vernon wasn't exactly in a position to negotiate from a prison cell. Courtney called me about a week after the sentencing. It wasn't an apology. I didn't expect one, and I wouldn't have trusted it if it came. What she said was this. She knew more than she let on. She'd seen what her father did to Donna, to her own mother, years ago. She told herself it was Donna's fault, that Donna provoked him, that the divorce was mutual. It was easier than admitting her father was a predator who targeted lonely women. She said she wasn't calling to ask for anything. She just wanted me to know that she wasn't going to pretend anymore. I said, okay, and that was it. We haven't spoken since. Some chapters don't need a long ending. They just need to close. Levi started going back to Grandma's house. Nobody told him where to sit. Nobody threw away his models. Nobody told him that real boys don't play with toy planes. My mother bought him a new kit, a P-51 Mustang, the one he'd been eyeing at the hobby shop on Bragg Boulevard for weeks. They built it together on the kitchen table, the same table where Vernon used to sit and hand down his pronouncements like a man who'd earned the right. Now it was covered in glue, tiny plastic parts, and an instruction sheet written in font so small my mother had to wear her reading glasses. I watched them through the kitchen window one Saturday afternoon, Levi carefully positioning a wing while Nadine held the fuselage steady, and something loosened in my chest that had been tight for months. It looked like peace. It looked like what family is supposed to feel like when nobody's stealing it from you. 2 months after the sentencing, I received the notification I'd been waiting for. Selected for CGSC resident at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, Command and General Staff College, the course the Army sends its best majors to, the ones they're investing in for senior leadership. My brigade commander called me personally, told me I'd earned a top block officer evaluation report, most qualified, told me I was one of the strongest officers in the brigade. I thanked him and hung up and sat in my truck for a minute, because sometimes good news needs a quiet moment before it feels real. My family care plan was solid again. Nadine in her own house with her name on the deed, her savings slowly rebuilding, and her grandson safe at her kitchen table. Funny thing about clearing the noise out of your life, suddenly you can hear yourself think, and when you can think clearly, you perform at your best. I keep my savings in a separate account nobody else can touch, by the way. 12 years in the Army taught me that. One account for bills, one for emergencies, and one that nobody knows about. Not my mother, not my chain of command, not anyone, because you never know when the ground is going to shift, and when it does, you need to be standing on something solid. Thank you so much for staying with me through this one. I've got more stories just like this already waiting on your screen. Go ahead and tap one, and I'll meet you right there. See you in the next story.